The galaxy had forgotten the sound of humanity. It had been 37 standard years since the Glycon Imperium brought its celestial choir to Terra, and in their wake, there was only harmony. The Glycon, crystalline entities of immense power, did not conquer with fire and steel, but with resonance. They sang a song of absolute order, a symphony of psychic and sonic energy that overwrote reality itself, erasing cultures, histories, even the chaotic static of individual thought. Worlds that were harmonized did not die. They were subsumed, their unique melodies lost within the Imperium's eternal, crushing chord. The last of the human race, a few thousand souls adrift in the void, were not refugees. They were dissonants, a discordant note in a galaxy that craved silence. They hid in the witch's cradle, a stellar nursery of roiling nebulae and violent gravitational tides where the Glycon song could not easily find them. Their home was the Somnus, a derelict cryo-ark never meant for long-term habitation, its corridors slick with recycled moisture and the scent of nutrient paste and despair. Here, in the deepest, most shielded chamber of the dying ship, Kalen worked. He was a memory weaver, one of the last of his kind, a living archivist whose neural pathways were threaded with filaments of psych-active crystal, allowing him to interface with the Echo Loom. The Loom was not a machine, but a living artifact, a vast, pulsating mass of bioluminescent tissue salvaged from the ruins of Terra, containing the collected memories, art, consciousness of a dead species. It was humanity's soul, and Kalen was its keeper. He floated in the warm, saline fluid of the Weaver's cradle, his body weightless, his mind adrift in the sea of the past. The crystalline filaments woven into his spine and skull hummed, connecting him to the ghosts of 10 billion people. Today, he was not weaving a memory of triumph or love. He was walking through the fire of the end. He was on the plains of New Alexandria, watching the sky split open not with light, but with sound. He felt the tremor in the earth as the first wave of the Glycon song washed over the world, a note so pure and powerful it shattered glass for 1,000 miles. He could taste the ozone and the dust as buildings of steel and pride crumbled into resonant dust. He felt the terror of the crowds, their screams silenced not by death, but by the invasive harmony that unmade their minds, smoothing over their fears and passions until they were placid, empty vessels. Kalen had walked this memory 100 times, searching for some tactical flaw, some weakness his ancestors might have missed in their final, frantic moments. But there was nothing. The Glycon's power was absolute, a force of nature more than a military strategy. It was like trying to find a weakness in a supernova. He pushed deeper into the memory, into the final moments of the Terran High Command, the Loom feeding him the sensory data of General Anya Sharma as she stood on the command deck of the orbital station Vigil. He saw the Glycon fleet through her eyes, not ships of metal, but vast, cathedral-like structures of living crystal that pulsed with internal light, moving through space with the silent grace of leviathans. He heard the final, desperate reports from her officers, their voices warping and degrading as the harmonization wave reached the station. Then, he felt it General Sharma's last act of defiance. It wasn't a weapon she fired, but a signal, a scorched earth, data packet, a torrent of raw, unstructured information designed to be indigestible to the Glycon's collective consciousness. It contained everything, every work of art, every scientific theory, every whispered prayer and hateful curse of humanity. It was a poison pill of pure chaos, a final scream into the void. The Glycon had absorbed it. Of course, their harmony was designed to process and nullify any rogue data. But as Kalen focused the Loom on that specific moment, filtering the memory through 1,000 different analytical spectra, he found something. It was almost imperceptible, a flicker in the overwhelming symphony of the harmonization wave. A ghost note, a tiny, aberrant frequency buried deep within the Glycon's perfect song, born from the chaotic mess of Sharma's data scream. It was a frequency the Glycon could not hear, a mathematical impossibility within their rigid sonic structure. Their harmony was built on principles of perfect, unwavering order. This note was pure, unadulterated chaos. It was a flaw not in their technology, but in their very philosophy. It was a sound their minds, their entire civilization, were physically incapable of processing. To them, it was silence, a void in their perfect music. To Kalen, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock that had imprisoned his people for a generation. He pulled himself out of the loom, gasping, the saline solution sluicing from his thin frame. The filaments in his skin dimmed as the connection severed, leaving him shivering and alone in the humming chamber. He stumbled out, his legs weak, and sealed the loom's vault behind him. The corridors of the Somnus were dimly lit, the ship's power diverted to life support and the engines that kept them hidden in the turbulent nebula. People huddled in small groups, their faces etched with the familiar resignation of the hunted. They were the children of the survivors, a generation born in exile who had never felt soil under their feet or seen an unfiltered sun. They knew Terra only through the memories he wove for them. Stories of a paradise lost to a monster they could never fight. He found Mara in the ship's makeshift command center, a cramped space built around what was once the Cryo-Ark's primary navigation hub. Mara was the Somnus's de facto leader, a pragmatist whose parents had been engineers on the ship before the fall. Her face was sharp, her eyes a piercing gray that seemed to miss nothing, and she bore the burden of their survival with a grim fortitude that left little room for hope. She was looking at a flickering schematic of their power converters when Kalen burst in. "I found it," he said, his voice hoarse. Mara didn't look up. "Found what?" "Weaver, another sad story to tell the children so they don't forget the taste of food they've never eaten." Her words were sharp, but Kalen was used to her bitterness. It was the armor she wore to protect what little was left of their people. "A weapon," he breathed, leaning against the console to steady himself. "A way to make them listen." That got her attention. She turned slowly, her gaze analytical, dissecting him. "We have no weapons. Kalen, we have a repurposed mining laser that can barely chip an asteroid and 3 kinetic torpedoes with expired guidance systems. The Glycon sing, and worlds die. We have nothing that can fight a song." "But what if we could sing back?" he urged, his mind racing. He began to explain what he had found the ghost note, the aberrant frequency, the flaw in the Imperium's perfect harmony. He described it not as a scientist, but as a weaver, a storyteller. He painted a picture of the Glycon's consciousness as a flawless crystal lattice, and this frequency as a single, resonant vibration that could shatter it from within. It wouldn't be a weapon of destruction, not in the traditional sense. It would be a weapon of deconstruction. It would introduce chaos into their perfect order. It would force them to hear the dissonance they had spent millennia erasing from the galaxy. Mara listened, her expression unreadable. Around them, the other bridge crew had fallen silent, drawn in by the impossible hope in Kalen's voice. When he finished, the silence stretched, thick and heavy. "A frequency," Mara said flatly. "You want to fight a galactic empire that wiped out 100 billion humans with a sound. They fight with a sound," Kalen countered. "It's the only battlefield where we might stand a chance. We can't outfight them, but maybe we can outthink them." We can use their own nature against them." He could see the conflict in her eyes. The pragmatist in her saw only the foolishness of the plan, the infinitesimal odds. But the survivor, the woman who had spent her entire life running, saw a glimmer of something else. Not victory, perhaps, but a chance to finally stop running. A chance to scream back at the void. "Even if this ghost note exists," she said, her voice low, "how would we generate it? The ship's comms array is designed for communication, not for broadcasting a frequency that could unravel the fabric of an enemy's mind. We don't have the power, the equipment, or the expertise." "But we do," a new voice said from the doorway. It was Jorik, the ship's oldest living engineer, a man whose body was a roadmap of scars from a lifetime of keeping the somnus from falling apart. He was ancient, his skin thin as paper, but his eyes were still sharp behind a pair of greasy magnifiers. He hobbled into the room, leaning on a magnetized cane. "The cryostasis wave emitters," Jorik rasped, tapping a section of the schematic Mara had been studying. They were designed to generate a low-frequency resonance field to prevent cellular degradation in the cryopods, a harmony of a sort. With enough modification, if we bypass the governors and reroute the main reactor conduit, we could turn the entire forward hull into a resonant tuning fork. His eyes met Kalen's, a spark of dangerous, long-dormant ingenuity flaring within them. "We can't build a weapon to fight the Glycon. But you're right, boy. We might just be able to build an instrument. A very, very loud one." The idea began to spread through the ship like a contagion, a fever of impossible hope. For the first time in a generation, the talk in the corridors was not of rationing or system failures, but of action. It was a terrifying, exhilarating change. They had a target, a purpose beyond mere survival. Kalen provided the memory, the precise frequency and modulation of the ghost note extracted from the loom. Jorik and his team of scavengers and mechanics began the monumental task of transforming the Somnus itself into a weapon. They stripped wiring from non-essential systems, cannibalized backup generators, jury-rigged power conduits that glowed an angry red with the energy being diverted to the cryo-emitters. The plan was simple in its audacity and suicidal in its execution. They would take the Somnus to a Glycon harmonization relay, a massive crystalline station that amplified the Imperium's song across entire sectors of space. These relays were the heart of Glycon control, and they were always heavily guarded. They would fly their broken, dying ship into the teeth of the enemy, and before they were inevitably destroyed, they would play their song. They would broadcast the ghost note directly into the relay, using the Imperium's own network to spread their discordant message of chaos. It was a one-way trip. The power required to generate the frequency would overload every system on the Somnus, effectively cooking the ship from the inside out. They would have one shot, a single, fleeting moment to make their stand. Kalen found himself at the center of it all. He was no longer just a weaver, a passive observer of the past. He was the architect of their future, however brief it might be. He worked alongside Jorik, translating the abstract concept of the ghost note into tangible engineering specifications. He had to describe the texture and color of the sound, using the artistic language of a weaver to guide the scientific minds of the engineers. He felt the weight of General Sharma's final act, the burden of her desperate hope now resting on his shoulders. One evening, as the ship shuddered from another power rerouting test, Mara found him in the mess hall, staring at a bowl of untouched nutrient paste. "They're calling it the Revenant's Hymn," she said, sitting across from him. "The crew, they're treating this like a holy mission." It's the first time they've had a mission that wasn't about finding the next pocket of breathable air. Kalen replied, his voice tired. I worry about what this has unleashed. Mara, we were survivors. Now we're becoming destroyers. Mara looked at him, her gray eyes softening for a rare moment. My parents were on Terra when the song came. I was 10 years old, one of the last children evacuated to the Somnus. I remember watching the planet through the viewport. I couldn't hear anything, but I could see the lights of the cities flicker and die, one by one. The Glycon don't think they're destroying anything. They believe they are bringing peace, a perfect silent order. They're erasing us, Kalen, not just killing us. If we do nothing, we will be forgotten. Our art, our love, our rage, it will all just become a part of their harmony. She leaned forward, her voice a fierce whisper. I don't want to destroy them. I want to make them hear us. I want them to know that we were here. Let our final act be a scream they can never forget. Let our dissonance be eternal. Kalen looked down at his hands, the hands of a historian, an artist. They were calloused now from working with the engineers, stained with grease and coolant. He was being remade, just as his people were. They were reforging their grief into a weapon, their history into a war song. He finally understood. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about memory. It was about ensuring that the final note of humanity's symphony was not one of quiet submission, but a defiant, chaotic, and beautiful scream that would echo through the stars forever. He met Mara's gaze, the exhaustion in his own eyes replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Then let's make sure it's loud enough to wake the dead. The belly of the Somnus had become a foundry for a god's tuning fork. The cavernous Cryo Bay, once a silent, frozen cathedral to a future that never was, now screamed with the tortured light of plasma cutters and the percussive clang of mag hammers on stressed metal. Yorick, a grizzled prophet presiding over this chaotic birth, moved through the sparks and smoke like a wraith, his voice a gravelly rasp that cut through the din, directing his acolytes of grease and grit. They were tearing the soul out of their ship, rerouting its circulatory system of power conduits and grafting them onto the cryo emitters, which were being stripped of their safeties and fused into a single, massive array at the ship's prow. The forward hull, once a shield against the void, was being remade into a speaker cone, its plating thinned and reinforced in a pattern Kalen had provided, a fractal design derived from the memory of General Sharma's data scream. The ship groaned in protest, its ancient frame shuddering under the strain of its own mutilation. Lights flickered constantly throughout the inhabited decks, and the recycled air carried the metallic tang of ozone and vaporized steel. This was the cost of building their instrument of chaos. They were killing their home to give it one. Final voice. Kalen spent his days in the foundry, not as a laborer, but as a conductor. He would connect to the loom for brief, agonizing intervals, immersing himself in the ghost note, then try to describe its esoteric properties to Jorik. It needs to feel sharper, he'd say, his hands tracing invisible shapes in the air. The decay of the frequency can't be smooth. It has to splinter, like shattering glass. Yorick would grunt, wipe sweat from his brow with the back of a scorched glove, and translate Kalen's poetry into mathematics, shouting new specifications to his team. Mara, meanwhile, managed the slow, painful death of the rest of the ship. She was the executor of their collective will, making the brutal calculations required for their final journey. She oversaw the rationing of everything from water to the very air they breathed, diverting every spare watt of power to Yorick's monstrous creation. She held the final briefing in the mess hall, the only space large enough to hold the 212 souls who remained. The schematics of their target, Relay Station Praxos were projected onto the far wall. It was a thing of terrifying beauty, a crystalline spindle 100 kilometers long, surrounded by a halo of smaller Glycon cruisers that moved in silent, perfect orbits, like electrons around a nucleus. Praxos was located in the Corda system, a major Glycon hub, and it was the source of the harmony that pacified the entire Perseus arm. "This is our destination," Mara said, her voice dweeby and devoid of false optimism. "Our journey will take 17 standard cycles, navigating through the Silent Lanes regions of space where the Imperium's song is weakest. We will be running on minimal power, a ghost in their machine. Once we reach the Corda system, we will perform a high-velocity burn directly at the relay. Jorik's team estimates we will have a window of approximately 90 seconds from the start of the burn until the station's defensive harmonics tear us apart." She paused, letting the weight of those 90 seconds settle over the silent crowd. "In that window, we will activate the Revenant's hymn. We will broadcast Kalen's note. The energy release will consume the Somnus and everyone on it. There is no return. There is no escape. This is not a battle for survival. It is an act of remembrance." No one spoke. In their faces, Kalen saw not just fear, but a profound and weary acceptance. They were the last page of a long and brilliant book, and they had decided to burn with a fire bright enough to be seen across the galaxy. The night before their departure, Kalen entered the loom for what he knew would be the last time. He didn't seek the memory of the fall, nor the ghost note that had become his obsession. Instead, he reached back, weaving together a tapestry of memories for his people, a final gift. He broadcasted it not on a screen, but directly into the ship's low-level psychic field, a whisper to the subconscious of every crew member. He gave them the memory of a child's laughter in a sun-drenched field on Terra. He gave them the feeling of rain on their skin, the scent of a forest after a storm, the taste of real fruit picked from a tree. He gave them the memory of a jazz quartet in a smoky New Orleans club, a chaotic, improvisational music so antithetical to the Glycon's harmony that it was a weapon in itself. He wove together the memory of a scientist's eureka moment, an artist's final brushstroke, a mother's embrace. He did not show them victory or glory. He showed them life in all its messy, imperfect, and beautiful dissonance. He wanted them to remember not what they were fighting against, but what they were screaming for. When he finally disconnected, drained and hollow, he found Mara waiting for him outside the vault. Her eyes were wet. "It was beautiful, Weaver," she whispered. "Now they'll have something to hold on to in the dark." Leaving the witch's cradle was like being expelled from the womb. For 37 years, the roiling, violent clouds of the nebula had been their shield, its gravitational chaos scrambling the Glycon's sensors and muffling their song. The Somnus pushed through the final veil of purple and crimson gas, and for the first time in a generation, its crew looked out upon the clear, sharp, and terrifyingly empty black of ordered space. The stars here were not the wild, blazing fires of the cradle. They were cold, distant points arranged in a placid, predictable tapestry. The silence was the most unsettling part. It was a palpable presence, a pressure against the hull. This was Glycon territory, a space that had been harmonized, its natural chaos smoothed over into a sterile perfection. They were a rogue note in a silent symphony, and they felt naked, exposed, and utterly alone. Mara commanded the ship with icy precision. Power was cut to all non-essential systems. The corridors were dark, lit only by emergency strips. The ship moved like a phantom, its engines burning at a fraction of their capacity, riding the edges of gravity wells to mask its trajectory. Kalen found a new, unexpected role in their journey. His sensitivity to the loom had made him uniquely attuned to the psychic resonance of the galaxy. He could feel the Glacon song, even here in the silent lanes. It was a faint, subliminal hum at the edge of his consciousness, a constant, low-level headache that promised annihilation. He learned to interpret its ebbs and flows, to sense the distant, powerful chords of their patrol routes and the focused beams of their sensor sweeps. "There," he would murmur from his station on the bridge, his eyes closed. "A current to port. Stronger. They're broadcasting a census harmony 2 systems over. We need to steer starboard, into the trough." Mara would adjust their course without question, her trust in his strange, intuitive navigation absolute. He was reading the sheet music of their enemy and guiding them through the rests. 12 cycles into their journey, the crisis came. They were navigating a dense asteroid field, using the floating rock and ice to further mask their signature, when Kalen felt a sudden, sharp spike in the harmony. It was close. "Glacon Patrol!" he choked out, his head throbbing. "A Lancer frigate. It's coming around the primary asteroid. It will see us in 3 minutes." Panic flared on the bridge. Their mining laser was useless, their torpedoes offline. They were a sheep drifting into the path of a wolf. "Kill all power," Mara commanded, her voice cutting through the fear. "Everything but minimal life support and Kalen station. Drift mode. Pretend we're a dead rock." The ship went utterly dark and silent. The hum of the ventilators died. The data screens winked out, and the crew was plunged into a terrifying, breathless stillness. Through the forward viewport, they saw it. The Glacon Lancer emerged from behind a massive, slowly tumbling asteroid. It was a sliver of crystalline perfection, its facets catching the light of the distant star. It moved with an unnerving grace, its song washing over their hull, a focused, inquisitive harmony designed to detect active technology and life signs. On the bridge, people held their breath, their hearts pounding in the sudden, suffocating silence. Kalen felt the song pressing in, not just on the ship, but on his mind. It was trying to read him, to smooth over his thoughts. He fought back, focusing his consciousness on the most chaotic memory he could access from the loom, a recording of a stock market floor in the final moments before a crash, a cacophony of 1,000 panicked, greedy voices screaming at once. He wrapped the memory around himself like a shield of psychic static. The Lancer drifted closer, its analytical song intensifying. A single, focused beam of harmonic energy swept across the somnus. The ship's frame vibrated, a low hum that seemed to come from their very bones. One of the younger crew members on the bridge let out a small, terrified whimper. Mara shot him a look that could freeze fire, and he fell silent. His hands clamped over his mouth. The seconds stretched into eternity. The Glacon ship hung in the void, a predator tasting the air. Kalen felt its song probing, searching, and then, finding nothing but cold, inert metal and the faint, chaotic, psychic noise he was projecting, it moved on. The frigate slid past them, a silent, deadly marvel, and disappeared back into the asteroid field. For a full hour, no one moved. Then, with a shudder, the emergency lights flickered back on. A collective, ragged breath filled the bridge. They had survived. They had stared into the face of the enemy and had been dismissed as meaningless debris. The close call, however, had taken its toll. The focused harmonic scan had caused a cascade failure in one of the already strained power relays. Jorik's voice crackled over the comm, strained and furious. The primary coolant line for the resonance engine is compromised. We're leaking plasma. I can patch it, but we've lost 30% of our reserve power. We have enough for the journey, but the final burn, it's going to be shorter. Mara, we won't have 90 seconds. We'll have 60. 60 seconds, a single minute to deliver the final message of a species that had existed for 200,000 years. The weight of that number was heavier than any star. The final 5 cycles of their journey were a blur of tension and grim resolve. They were deep in Glycon territory now. The background harmony a constant, oppressive presence. Finally, the Somnus dropped out of its low-power cruise at the edge of the Corda system. Before them, hanging in the blackness like a jewel of impossible geometry, was Relay Station Praxos. It was larger and more terrifying than the schematics had ever suggested. The central crystalline spindle pulsed with a soft, internal white light, and the halo of cruisers surrounding it wove intricate, silent patterns of patrol. But it was the sound, the psychic sound that Kalen felt, that truly stole their breath. It was the concentrated source of the Imperium's Galactic Symphony, a chord of such immense power and unwavering order that it felt like the voice of God. It was a sound that promised peace, unity, and the complete and utter annihilation of the self. This was the fortress they meant to storm. This was the choir they intended to silence. As the 212 surviving humans stared at the heart of their enemy's power, the crippled, dying Arc ship felt impossibly small. A single speck of dust about to be crushed under the heel of infinity. Mara stood beside Kalen on the bridge, her face a pale mask in the glow of the viewport. "So," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "that's what the end of the world looks like." Kalen didn't take his eyes off the relay. "No," he replied, a strange, fierce calm settling over him as he felt the ghost note resonate in his mind, a defiant counter-melody to the station's overwhelming song. "That's the instrument we're about to play." And the final approach was a fall. There was no other word for it. Mara gave the order to re-engage the main drive, and the Somnus, for the first time in weeks, roared with a semblance of its old power. It was a ragged, painful sound, the cry of a dying beast lunging at its killer. They were no longer a ghost drifting in the currents of space. They were a spear, thrown with the last ounce of a civilization's strength, aimed at the heart of a silent god. On the bridge, the crew moved with a quiet, focused grace that belied the terror of their situation. They were a symphony of their own, each member a vital note in this final composition. There were no wasted movements, no panicked shouts. They had lived with this moment in their minds for 17 days. And now that it was here, a strange tranquility settled over them. They were already ghosts. The next 60 seconds were merely a formality. As the Somnus accelerated, the psychic pressure of Praxos intensified exponentially. It was no longer a background hum, but a physical force, a vibration that worked its way through the hull and into their bones, making their teeth ache and their vision swim. Kalen felt it most acutely. The song of the relay was trying to unmake him, to smooth the chaotic edges of his grief, his fear, his very identity into a placid, harmonious whole. He gritted his teeth, the memory of the New Orleans Jazz Quartet blaring in his mind, its discordant, joyful noise a shield against the crushing perfection of the Glycon's music. "Defensive harmonics are engaging," the tactical officer reported, her voice tight. "The cruisers are repositioning to intercept." Outside the viewport, the silent, graceful dance of the Glycon ships became a deadly geometry. They moved to form a crystalline net, preparing to catch the insignificant insect flying into their web. A bow wave of pure sonic energy began to form ahead of the relay, a shimmering distortion in space. It was the station's primary shield, a wall of absolute order that would disintegrate any matter that was not in perfect harmony with it. That was the wall they had to hit before they could sing their song. "Yorick, what's your status?" Mara's voice was a rock in the swirling sea of energy. The comm crackled. "The engine is glowing. Captain, we're pouring every last drop of the ship's life into the emitters. The containment fields are screaming bloody murder. It's a beautiful, terrible sight." There was a note in the old engineer's voice that Kalen had never heard before, not resignation, but a kind of fierce, artistic pride. He wasn't just an engineer. He was a maestro, tuning his instrument for its one and only performance. 45 seconds to impact. A thought struck Kalen, a sudden, desperate need born from his weaver's soul. He couldn't just fire their note blindly into that perfect harmony. He needed to understand it, to see the structure he was about to shatter. It was the historian in him, the archivist, needing to know the nature of the thing he was about to destroy. "Mara, I have to go into the loom," he said, turning to her, his eyes wide with urgency. "I need to use it as a filter, an amplifier. I need to hear what we're really fighting." Mara stared at him, her face taut. "Kalen, there's no time. The feedback from the relay's song could kill you." "It's gonna kill me anyway," he shot back. "Let me die seeing the truth." For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then she gave a single, sharp nod. "Do it. Tell us what you see." Kalen scrambled from his station, his body protesting the G-forces of their acceleration, and jacked his personal interface into the loom's auxiliary port on the bridge. He didn't have time for the Weaver's cradle. This would be a raw, unfiltered connection. The world dissolved. He was no longer in the Somnus, but adrift in an infinite ocean of sound. The song of Praxos was all around him, a cathedral of light and music so vast and complex it dwarfed any human creation. It was beautiful, terrifyingly so. He felt his own consciousness begin to fray, the edges of his memories being planed smooth by the relentless perfection of the music. He fought, focusing the loom's analytical power, using it like a lens to peer into the heart of the great chord. He expected to find a sterile, monolithic structure, a single, perfect note of control repeated to infinity. But what he found was infinitely more horrifying. It wasn't one song, it was billions. He could hear them, buried deep within the harmony, their individual melodies twisted and compressed, forced to resonate at the precise frequency the glycon demanded. He heard the soaring, psionic ballads of the long-lost Cygnian avians, a species of winged empaths. He heard the percussive, geological chants of the Olin, a silicon-based race that thought on a timescale of millennia. He heard the whispering, photosynthetic hymns of the Viridian flora, a sentient jungle world, and, beneath it all, faint but unmistakable, he heard the chaotic, vibrant, messy static of humanity. The 10 billion souls of Terra, the glycon, were not destroyers. They were collectors. They didn't erase cultures. They imprisoned them, preserving them like insects in amber, their minds trapped in an eternal, harmonious chorus. The harmonization was not an act of war. It was an act of acquisition. They were immortal archivists, and their archive was a prison of the soul from which there was no escape. This perfect, silent peace Mara had spoken of was a lie. It was the silence of a museum, where living things were put on display, their voices stolen and repurposed to sing a single, monotonous song of praise to their curators. The realization struck Kalen with the force of a physical blow. He reeled in the psychic tempest, the truth a poison in his mind. Their mission had changed. The Revenant's hymn was no longer a scream of defiance from a dead species. It was a key, a hammer, a choice. What would their ghost note do to this great and terrible library? Would the dissonance shatter the crystal cages and free the minds trapped within? Or would introducing such a violent, chaotic frequency into this delicate psychic structure cause a catastrophic collapse, annihilating the very consciousnesses they now knew were still there? He was a memory weaver, a preserver of souls, and he was poised to potentially commit a genocide on a scale the Glycon themselves had never imagined. He ripped the interface from his port, crashing back into his body. The bridge was a blur of red alerts and shaking metal. 30 seconds to impact, someone shouted. Kalen stumbled to Mara's side, grabbing her arm. Mara, they're alive. All of them. The ones they harmonized. They're still in there. The relay isn't a weapon, it's a cage. He explained what he'd seen, the words tumbling out of him in a desperate torrent. Mara's face, illuminated by the flashing red lights, was a mask of stone. She listened, her gray eyes fixed on the shimmering wall of energy that now filled the viewport, the end of their world rushing toward them. If we do this, Kalen pleaded, his voice cracking, we could kill them all, truly kill them. We could be the ones to finally erase them. The tactical officer cried out, hull integrity at 90%. The bow wave is starting to boil our forward plating. Mara turned her gaze from the viewport to Kalen. Her expression was one of profound, ancient sorrow. She placed her hand over his. Do you think that's living, Kalen? She asked, her voice quiet amidst the chaos. To have your mind, your soul, your very history locked in a cage, forced to sing a song that isn't yours for all eternity, is that better than oblivion? She looked around the bridge, at the faces of her crew, pale but resolute. We were born in exile, and we will die in a fire, but we have lived as ourselves. We made choices. We loved, we hated, we remembered. They have taken that from billions. What you saw, it isn't life. It's an echo, a blasphemy. 20 seconds. The ship is tearing itself apart. Captain, Yorick's voice, strained and filled with static, came over the comm. The engine is at peak resonance. She's ready to sing her heart out. Just give the word. The choice fell to Mara, the leader, the pragmatist, the 10-year-old girl who had watched her world go silent. She squeezed Kalen's hand, a silent apology for the terrible burden she was about to place on him, on all of them. An echo is not a voice, she said, her own voice ringing with a terrible, final clarity. She turned back to the command chair. Kalen, prepare to channel the frequency. Jorik, on my mark. Kalen stumbled back to his station, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Mara was right. This was not a choice between life and death. It was a choice between an eternity in chains and a single, shared moment of glorious, chaotic freedom. He was a weaver. His job was to preserve memory. And the most vital part of memory was the truth. The truth was that humanity and all those other races were not meant to be a part of a chorus. They were meant to be a beautiful, clashing, and magnificent noise. He looked at Mara, who met his gaze from across the bridge and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He was ready. 10 seconds to impact. The tactical officer screamed over the shriek of tortured metal. Hull integrity at 40%. We're breaking up. Through the viewport, the wall of harmonic energy was no longer a shimmering curtain. It was a blinding, all-consuming sun. The ship bucked violently, throwing people from their stations. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. It was the end. It was the beginning. Mara gripped the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white. Her voice did not shake. It cut through the apocalypse raging around them, clear and absolute. "Jorik," she commanded, "sing for them." There was no sound, not in the traditional sense. When Jorik unleashed the Revenant's hymn, it was not an explosion of noise, but of silence. It was the inverse of the Glykon song, a wave of pure, weaponized chaos that punched a hole in the perfect harmony of Praxos. On the bridge of the Somnus, as the ship was being consumed by the relay's defensive field, the world went quiet. The psychic scream of the Glykon's music simply ceased, replaced by a profound and ringing emptiness. For Kalen, connected to the loom, it was like being at the heart of a supernova. The ghost note, amplified by the full, dying power of the Somnus's reactor and focused by the cryo-emitters, struck the crystalline lattice of the relay. He didn't just hear it, he saw it, felt it, became it. He saw the note, his note, spread through the relay not like a wave, but like a crack racing across a frozen lake. It was a flaw, an imperfection, a lie introduced into a system of absolute truth, and the system could not process it. The structure of the great Glykon song shattered. The billions of imprisoned minds, held in perfect, forced resonance for centuries, were suddenly released. The effect was not the gentle awakening Kalen might have hoped for, nor the silent annihilation he had feared. It was a psychic detonation. The dam of perfect order broke, and a tsunami of raw, unfiltered consciousness erupted from the relay. It was a wave of pure, primal emotion. He felt the accumulated rage of 1,000 warrior species, the bottomless sorrow of scholars who had watched their libraries burn, the terrified confusion of children who had been harmonized in their homes, and the defiant, messy, beautiful roar of 10 billion human souls screaming their names back into a universe that had tried to make them forget. This was the sound of memory returning. It was the sound of identity, raw and bleeding, clawing its way back to the surface. It was a cacophony of pain, joy, love, and hate so overwhelming that it threatened to tear Kalen's own mind apart. The Somnus was gone. In the instant the hymn fired, the ship and its 212 souls had been atomized by the relay's shield, their physical forms erased, but for a fleeting moment, their consciousnesses, linked by the gravity of their shared purpose, joined the great, chaotic wave erupting from Praxis. Kalen felt Mara's grim resolve beside him, Jorik's fierce pride, and the collective, defiant spirit of his people. They were a single, bright chord in the sudden, mad symphony of the liberated. Their final act, not one of destruction, but of liberation. They had not just screamed into the void, they had given the void its voice back. Then, for Kalen, there was only darkness. He was untethered, a point of pure awareness drifting in the chaotic psychic aftermath. His connection to the loom was severed. His body was gone, but his mind, his consciousness, a ghost in the machine he had helped to break, remained. He was adrift in the great, screaming silence. And then, a new sound began to emerge from the chaos. It was a single, piercing note of pure, cold fury. It was the Glykon, the relay station. Praxos had not been destroyed. It was wounded, bleeding psychic energy into the void. Its song shattered into 1,000,000 discordant shards. But the entities themselves, the crystalline consciousnesses that piloted the station and the surrounding cruisers, were still there. and they had heard the silence. For the first time in their immortal existence, they had experienced the absence of their perfect harmony, and it had driven them insane. The graceful, geometric dance of the Glycon fleet became a frenzied, erratic spasm. Their ships, now pulsing with a violent, angry crimson light, began firing indiscriminately. Beams of harmonic energy, no longer tuned to pacify but to obliterate, lashed out into space, carving up the wreckage of the Somnus and striking their own cruisers. The perfect, ordered mind of the Glycon Imperium had been broken, and in its place was a wounded, terrified beast, lashing out at a universe that no longer made sense. Kalen watched the madness unfold, a silent observer to the chaos he had wrought. He had wanted to make them listen. Now, they were screaming, and their screams were death. He felt a profound sense of despair. What had he accomplished? He had swapped a silent prison for a violent madhouse. And then he felt something else. A flicker of awareness in the chaotic sea. A mind reaching out, not with the overwhelming force of the Glycon, but with a quiet, desperate curiosity. It was a human mind, not a memory from the loom, but a living, breathing consciousness. Somewhere out there, in the Corda system, someone else had heard the silence. The mind was a pilot, a scavenger named Ilara, who had been hiding in the shadow of a gas giant when the symphony of the galaxy had suddenly stopped. For her entire life, the faint, subliminal hum of the Glycon song had been a constant, a fact of life like the light of stars. Its sudden absence was as shocking as the sun going out. Then came the wave of liberated consciousness, a psychic shockwave that had nearly torn her own mind from her skull. But she was a survivor, her mind shielded by years of living on the fringe, and she had weathered the storm. Now, her ship, the stray dog, was picking up thousands of ghost signals, fragmented psychic transmissions from the erupting relay. She was hearing the voices of the lost. Kalen reached out, a ghost whispering on the psychic winds. He didn't use words, he sent an image. A memory, the face of Mara, resolute and calm. In the final moments before the end, he sent the feeling of Jorik's pride. He sent the story of the Somnus, a vessel of ghosts who had chosen to burn rather than fade away. Ilara, alone on the bridge of her small ship, gasped. She had assumed the event at Praxos was a Glycon civil war, a malfunction of their perfect machine. But this feeling, this story, this was human. It was filled with a familiar, reckless, and beautiful desperation, hope, an emotion she had long since learned to suppress, flared in her chest. She wasn't the last one. She wasn't alone. She opened a broad-spectrum comm channel, her fingers flying across the console. She didn't broadcast a message of war or rebellion. She broadcast a single and simple signal that had been used by human outcasts and scavengers for decades. A question, a call to the scattered, the hidden, the forgotten. The signal was a snippet of music, the first 4 notes of an ancient Terran symphony, a composition famous for its themes of fate and defiance. Da-da-da-dum. For a long time, there was no reply. The Glycon continued their frenzied, self-destructive rampage around the wounded relay. The chorus of newly freed minds screamed and wept in the psychic void. And then, an answer came. From a mining colony hidden deep in an asteroid belt. Another ship answered with the next 4 notes. From a derelict science station in a forgotten nebula, a third replied. From a lone freighter captain who had thought he was the last man alive. From a hidden enclave of artists on a rogue moon. From pockets of humanity scattered across the Perseus arm who had survived by being too small, too quiet, too insignificant for the Glycon to notice. The song continued. They had all heard the silence. They had all felt the psychic shockwave. And now they heard the call. For 37 years they had been hiding, surviving. The story of the Somnus, carried on the psychic winds by Kalen, gave them something more. It gave them a reason to fight. Kalen, the memory weaver, the ghost of a dead ship, had become a beacon. His consciousness, no longer tied to a physical form, became a nexus, a psychic switchboard operator in the brewing storm. He could feel the nascent network of human minds coming together, a fragile web of hope being woven in the darkness. He was no longer just an archivist of the past. He was becoming the historian of the future, witnessing its birth. The Glycon, in their madness, were beginning to regroup. The initial frenzy was subsiding, replaced by a cold, unified purpose. Their song was broken, but their technology was not. Their crimson light intensified, and the remaining ships of the Praxos fleet began to move with a new, ruthless precision. They had identified the source of their pain, the fragmented psychic signals, the human music, the chorus of the liberated. They could no longer harmonize the dissonance, so they would erase it. They began a systematic purge, their harmonic cannons firing not at ships, but at the sources of the psychic signals. They were targeting the minds in the relay, attempting to silence them permanently. They were trying to turn their great library into a graveyard. Kalen felt the minds begin to wink out. The voices he had just heard returned to the universe, silenced, truly and finally. The jubilant chaos of the liberation was turning into a massacre. He felt a surge of cold panic. He had freed them from their cages only to lead them to the slaughter. He had to warn the others, the nascent human fleet that was just beginning to answer the call. He focused his will, gathering the fading echoes of the Somnus crew around him, and sent a single, desperate message to Alara and the others who were listening. They are not broken. They are enraged. They are coming. Run. But as he sent the message, he knew it was not enough. The humans were too scattered, too weak. The Glycon, even wounded and insane, were a galactic power. Humanity's brief, defiant song was about to be silenced forever, unless they could find a way to fight back. And Kalen, the ghost in the machine, the weaver of memories, realized there was one last, terrible memory he could unleash. He had shattered their harmony with a note of chaos. Now, he would have to teach the galaxy a new song, the sound of human warfare. The nascent human resistance was a fleet of ghosts and forgotten things, a motley collection of battered freighters, repurposed mining vessels, and agile scavenger ships that answered Ilara's call. They converged on the Corda system's outer asteroid belt, a graveyard of primordial rock and ice, using the dense debris as cover. There were less than 50 ships in total, a pitiful armada against the might of a wounded but still lethal Glycon fleet. Their captains, who had spent decades in isolation, met for the first time not in person, but in the psychic space Kalen had become. He was the ghost between their thoughts, a silent, omnipresent narrator weaving their disparate threads into a single tapestry of purpose. Ilara, on the bridge of the stray dog, became his anchor, her sharp, pragmatic mind the focal point through which he could communicate. "He says they're adapting," she broadcasted to the other captains, her voice a tense whisper in the flickering hollows of their makeshift command channel. The Weaver feels them, rewriting their song. They're turning the harmony of control into a harmony of destruction. They're not just killing the minds in the relay. They're learning to weaponize the dissonance, turning our own chaos against us. Kalen could feel it. The Glycon's rage was crystallizing into a new form of music. It was a sharp, serrated chord of pure malice, designed to tear minds apart, to inflict not just silence but unbearable psychic pain. They were learning from the Revenant's hymn, twisting its purpose into an instrument of torture. The massacre at Praxis was a testing ground. Soon, they would unleash this new song on the rest of the galaxy. Humanity's defiant scream had inadvertently taught a monster how to shriek. It was in this desperate moment, with the Glycon's new weapon taking shape, that Kalen made his final terrible choice. He was a weaver, a keeper of memory. He had shown his people the beauty of their past to give them a reason to fight. Now, he would have to show them its brutality to give them the weapons to win. He reached deep into the Echoloom, not into the physical artifact he had left behind, but into the memory of it he carried within his own consciousness. He bypassed the art, the music, the love, and the laughter. He went straight to the forbidden archives, to the memories the weavers were sworn only to observe, never to share. He went to the memories of war. He unleashed the mind of a Terran fighter ace from the first interstellar war. Her senses fused with her ship, every vector and trajectory a part of her own body. He pushed her instincts, her muscle memory, her cold, predatory calm into the minds of the human pilots. He gave the freighter captains the stubborn, strategic genius of a fleet admiral who had held the line at the siege of Orion, teaching them how to use their slow, unwieldy ships as mobile fortresses, their hulls as shields for the smaller, faster vessels. He gave Alara the mind of General Anya Sharma herself, not just her final act of defiance, but her lifetime of tactical brilliance, her uncanny ability to see the battlefield not as it was, but as it could be, to find the single, exploitable flaw in any perfect formation. The influx of tactical knowledge was a shock to their systems. Pilots who had spent their lives running from pirates suddenly knew how to execute a perfect Thak weave. Engineers who had only ever patched leaky life support systems understood the resonant frequencies needed to disrupt Glycon energy fields. And Alara, standing on her bridge, saw the Glycon fleet not as an insurmountable force, but as a puzzle waiting to be solved. "They are a symphony," she murmured, her eyes distant, seeing the battle through Sharma's gaze. "Perfect harmony, perfect rhythm. But a symphony has a conductor." Her eyes locked onto the wounded but still massive form of Relay Station Praxis. The Glycon ships moved in perfect, synchronized patterns around it. Their new song of destruction was being broadcast from the relay, its shattered crystal lattice repurposed into a weaponized amplifier. Praxis was not just a target, it was their command and control. "That's our mark," Alara broadcasted, her voice now sharp with the authority of a general she had never met. "We don't have to win. We just have to break their rhythm." The plan she devised was one of pure human chaos, a desperate improvisation born from the memories Kalen had given them. They would use the asteroid field as a weapon. The heavy mining ships, their hulls reinforced for deep space excavation, would use their tractor beams and kinetic drivers to hurl massive asteroids at the Glycon fleet. It was crude, brutal, and utterly unpredictable. It was a strategy based not on elegant energy beams, but on throwing rocks. The Glycon, for all their power, fought with the perfect logic of musicians. They would never anticipate an enemy who fought like a barbarian. The battle began. The human fleet surged from the cover of the asteroid belt, a chaotic swarm against a perfect crystal wall. The Glycon unleashed their new song, a wave of psychic agony that washed over the human pilots. But Kalen was there, a shield in their minds. He wove a counter melody from the memories of human endurance, the stoicism of a surgeon in a field hospital, the focus of a deep-sea welder under 1,000 atmospheres of pressure, the stubborn hope of a parent waiting for a child to come home. He couldn't block the pain, but he could give them the strength to endure it. The first wave of asteroids, flung with desperate precision, slammed into the Glycon formation. The crystalline ships, designed to withstand focused energy, were surprisingly brittle against raw kinetic impact. One of the Lancer frigates shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Another was knocked from its perfect orbit, its song faltering for a crucial moment. The Glycon's perfect rhythm was broken. Their symphony stuttered. The smaller, faster human ships, flown by pilots now possessed by the ghosts of aces, dove into the breach. They didn't have weapons that could destroy the Glycon cruisers, but they harried them, their fusion drives flaring as they executed impossible maneuvers, drawing fire, creating chaos, forcing the perfect formation to break and scatter. It was a furball, a close-range brawl, a type of combat the Glycon had never experienced. Elara, her mind a cold, clear fusion of her own instincts and Sharma's genius, directed the chaos from the stray dog. Echo flight. Draw the forward cruisers toward the debris field. Heavy haulers target sector Gamma. Break their line of sight to the relay. Her commands were precise, intuitive. She was playing jazz on a battlefield of symphonies. At the heart of it all, Kalen fought a different war. He pushed his consciousness toward the wounded relay, past the screaming psychic defenses of the enraged Glycon. He was searching for the core, the central consciousness that was conducting this new song of hate. He found it a single, vast intelligence, the curator of the great library, now a being of pure, focused rage. He could not destroy it, but he could talk to it. He did not send a message of defiance or surrender. He sent a single, simple memory. The first one he had ever woven for the children of the Somnus, the memory of a child's laughter in a field of green grass under a yellow sun. It was a memory of life, pure and simple, a note of such profound and uncomplicated beauty that it was utterly alien to the Glycon's experience. The curator mind recoiled, its song of hate faltering for a nanosecond. In that instant of hesitation, Kalen pushed another memory, the feeling of rain on skin, the taste of fresh fruit, the sound of a jazz quartet. He showed it not the chaos of war, but the beautiful, vibrant chaos of life. He was not attacking it. He was reminding it of what it had tried to collect, what it had imprisoned and misunderstood. You wanted to preserve us, he sent, not in words, but in pure feeling. But you can't preserve a song by forcing it to be a single note. Life is not a harmony. It is a glorious, beautiful noise. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the battle around Praxos hung in the balance. Then, the piercing, hateful song emanating from the relay softened. It did not stop, but it changed. The sharp, serrated edges of its malice began to smooth over, replaced by a note of profound and infinite confusion. The Glycon cruisers, their movements suddenly erratic, their purpose lost, began to withdraw. They pulled back from the human fleet, their crimson light fading to a neutral, questioning white. They did not flee. They simply stopped. The battle was over. The human fleet, battered but largely intact, drifted it in the sudden, stunning silence. In the psychic void, Kalen felt the curator mind of Praxos reach out, not with a weapon, but with a question. It was a question that had no words, a query of pure concept. It was asking what it meant to be alive. The war was not won. The Glycon Imperium was vast, and the madness of Praxos was only one part of it. But something fundamental had changed. A dialogue had begun. Kalen, the last memory weaver, had become the first ambassador. His consciousness remained, a bridge between two species that had never understood each other. He was no longer just a ghost. He was a living memory, a testament to the fact that even in the face of perfect, crushing order, a single dissonant voice could change the song of the entire galaxy. The human ships began to gather the survivors, their comm channels alive with voices that had been silent for a generation. They were no longer the last of their kind. They were the first of a new era. They had a future. And Kalen, the boy who had kept the stories of a dead species, now had a universe of new ones to weave. The age of harmony was over. The age of noise had just begun.